The morning after the funeral, 3 men in suits knocked on my door at 8:15. I hadn't slept. I still had flour on my apron from a batch of biscuits I'd started at 5 in the morning out of pure habit, because my hands didn't know what else to do with themselves. They came in smiling, calling me sweetheart, setting a folder down on my kitchen table before I'd even offered them coffee. One of them said, "Barbara, we just want to make this easy on you." Another one already had a pen uncapped. I looked at that pen. I looked at the folder. And I thought about the notebook sitting in my dresser drawer upstairs, the one I'd found tucked inside my husband's Bible 2 days before he died. I didn't sign a thing. That morning, those 3 men found out something about me that 30 years of regulars at my diner already knew. I might look like a sweet old woman who says, "Y'all want grits with that," but I don't miss much. I never have. My name is Barbara Whitfield. I'm 68 years old, and I've run a little diner on the east side of Savannah, Georgia, for 30 years. Same address the whole time. Red vinyl booths. A bell over the door that still doesn't ring right. And regulars who've been coming in since their kids were in diapers and now bring their grandkids. I didn't inherit that diner. I built it. Waitressed 6 years 2 blocks over, saved every dollar, bought the place out when the old owner was ready to retire. My husband, Harold, was a quiet man. Worked construction most of his life, then went into business with a fellow named Dale Kessler back in the early 90s. Small outfit. Residential builds around the Savannah area. Harold ran the crews and the job sites. Dale handled the books and the paperwork. That's how it worked for over 20 years, and I never once thought to ask questions. People look at a woman like me and think they've got me figured out. Simple. Sweet. Not sharp enough to catch what's going on around her. Harold got sick 8 months before he died. Cancer. The kind that takes its time and makes you watch every bit of it happen. I sat with him through every appointment, every bad night, every paper the hospital and the lawyers, and eventually Dale himself put in front of him to sign. I read every one of those papers, too. Harold never knew how closely I was watching. And by the time he passed, I understood things about that construction company that Dale Kessler never imagined a diner-owning grandmother from the East Side would ever piece together. That's where this story really starts. Harold and I got married in the fall of 1985. I was 23, working the counter at the diner that wasn't mine yet, and he came in every Thursday after his shift with the same order. Meatloaf plate, sweet tea, extra cornbread. Took him 4 months to ask me to dinner. Took me about 4 seconds to say yes. He wasn't a man who talked a lot. Some women would have found that frustrating. I found it restful. After a long shift on my feet, I didn't need a husband who wanted to fill up every silence in the house. Harold could sit with me on the porch for an hour and not say 10 words, and it never once felt empty. He worked framing houses when we met, then roofing for a few years, and around 1991 he went into business with a man he'd known since high school, Dale Kessler. The two of them started small. A few residential jobs a year, mostly additions and renovations, then bigger builds as Savannah started growing out past the historic district. Kessler and Whitfield Construction. Harold's name was right there on the trucks, second billing, but his name all the same. Dale was the one who talked. Loud laugh, firm handshake, The kind of man who remembered your birthday and your kid's name and made you feel like the most important person in the room for as long as he was looking at you. I liked him well enough. For a long time. He came to our anniversary parties, stood up as best man when my nephew got married, brought his family to Sunday dinner more times than I can count. Dale ran the money side. Bids, contracts, payroll, the bank accounts. All of it went through him. Harold used to say, "I know how to build a house, Barbara. I don't know the first thing about a spreadsheet." He trusted Dale with that part of things the same easy way he trusted the sun to come up. It never occurred to him not to. I kept my diner running the whole time. Some years the diner made more than the construction company did, especially after the '08 crash slowed building work down for a while. I never asked Harold too much about the business side of things. That was his world. Same way the diner was mine. We had an understanding. You don't ask your husband how many biscuits I sell in a week, and I won't ask you what Dale's doing with the payroll account. Looking back now, I think that's exactly the kind of marriage Dale Kessler was counting on. We had one daughter, Renee, who moved to Atlanta for work and calls me every Sunday like clockwork. Harold doted on her something fierce when she was small, used to build her little wooden toys out of scrap lumber from the job sites, painted them himself even though he had no business calling himself a painter. She's got a whole shelf of them still, in her house in Atlanta. A crooked little train, a dollhouse with a roof that never quite sat right. That was Harold. Good with his hands, quiet with his words. A man who trusted the people he loved without asking too many questions. I loved him for 39 years exactly like that. I just didn't know until the very end how much that trust of his had cost us. Harold started losing weight in February, and at first none of us thought much of it. Man works construction his whole life. He's going to have some aches. Some days he doesn't feel like eating. It was Renee, actually, who called it during a visit home in March. She looked at her daddy across the dinner table and said, "Mama, has he always been this thin?" He hadn't. The diagnosis came in April. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3 by the time they caught it. The doctor at Memorial Health sat us both down and used words I wish I could forget. Words like aggressive and limited options. And Harold just nodded along like the man was describing somebody else's body, not his own. 8 months. That's what we got. 8 months from that appointment to the morning, I woke up next to him, and he wasn't breathing anymore. I closed the diner down to part-time hours during those months, hired my niece to run the counter 3 days a week so I could be with him. Every appointment, every round of treatment that made him sicker before it made him better. Every night he couldn't sleep from the pain. I was there. That's not a complaint. That's just what 39 years of marriage means when it comes down to it. You show up. Somewhere around June, the paperwork started. Not medical paperwork, business paperwork. Dale started coming by the house more often, always with a folder, always saying it was nothing to worry about. Just needed Harold's signature on some routine stuff. Refinancing on equipment. Updated insurance on the company vehicles. A change to how the LLC was structured. Something about protecting the business in case anything happened. I sat right there in the room every single time. Harold, weak as he was getting, still trusted Dale the same way he always had. Signed where Dale pointed, hardly reading past the first page some days because his hands were shaking too bad to hold the pen steady, let alone read fine print. I read it, though. Every page, every clause, while Dale sat there drinking my sweet tea and talking about the weather. I didn't understand half of what those documents said back then. I'm no lawyer. But I started writing things down. Dates. What each folder was labeled. What Dale said out loud versus what the paper actually said, because those two things didn't always match up. I never told Harold what I was doing. He had enough weighing on him. By September, Harold could barely get out of bed most days. Dale's visits slowed down some. Funny how that happens once a man stops being useful for signing things. But he still called sometimes, checking in, always ending the call the same way. "You just focus on getting better, buddy. I got everything handled on my end." I remember standing in the kitchen one evening in October, washing dishes, and hearing Harold on the phone in the next room, his voice so thin I almost couldn't make out the words. He said, "Dale, I need you to level with me about the Cypress Point numbers." Long pause, then quieter. All right. I trust you." I dried my hands and went and stood in the doorway. Harold looked up at me, and for just a second, 1 second, I saw something cross his face that wasn't sickness. It was doubt. He didn't say anything else about it that night. Neither did I. But 3 weeks later, I found the notebook. 3 weeks after that phone call I overheard, I was going through Harold's dresser looking for his good watch. Renee wanted to have it engraved for a memorial piece. And I found his old leather Bible sitting in the bottom drawer, the one his mother gave him back when we got married. He hadn't opened that Bible in years, not that I ever saw. Church wasn't really his thing, though he never said a word against mine. Something made me pick it up. Maybe just wanting to hold something of his that felt private, felt like him. When I opened it, a spiral notebook fell out from between the pages of Ecclesiastes. Small thing, maybe 40 pages. The kind you'd buy at a drugstore for a couple dollars. I almost didn't think anything of it at first. Figured maybe it was old grocery lists or something from a job site. It wasn't. The first page had a date at the top, March of that year, right around when we got the diagnosis. And underneath it, Harold's handwriting, shakier than I remembered it being before he got sick, but still his. Cypress Point draw. $47,000 requested by Dale for site prep. No prep done. Checked with Manny. Crew never got materials. I sat down on the edge of the bed and kept reading. Page after page. Dates going back almost 2 years. Numbers that didn't match up. Draws requested from the bank for materials that never showed up on job sites. Payments to subcontractors who, according to Harold's own notes, he'd personally called and confirmed never received a dime. A line item for consulting fees to a company Harold couldn't find any record of, paid out of the business account 4 times in 18 months. Always right around the time a big project closed out. He'd been keeping track. Quietly. For almost 2 years. Writing it all down in a Bible he never opened for anything else, in handwriting that got weaker and weaker as the pages went on, right up until about 6 weeks before he died, where the entries just stopped. The last page had 1 line by itself, dated in September, right around the time I heard him on that phone call in the kitchen. Asked Dale straight about Cypress Point. He said, "Don't worry about it." I didn't believe him, but I'm too tired to fight this right now. Told him I trusted him. I don't. God forgive me, I don't have the strength left to do anything about it. I read that line maybe 6 times before it really landed. My husband knew. He knew for 2 years that his business partner, his oldest friend, the man who stood up at our nephew's wedding, was stealing from him. And by the time he had the proof laid out in his own handwriting, the cancer had already taken enough out of him that he didn't have the strength to fight it. So he just wrote it down, kept the record. Maybe hoping he'd get better and deal with it himself. Maybe hoping somebody would find it after. I sat on that bed for a long time with the notebook in my lap, and I didn't cry the way you'd think. What I felt was something colder than grief, something that settled into my chest and just stayed there. Harold didn't have the strength left to fight Dale Kessler, but I did. CTA, Position 4, Direct Question Format. Do you understand what I just found? A dying man writing down proof against his own business partner, hidden inside his Bible because he didn't have the strength left to fight. Comment below. What would you have done in my place? Harold died 11 days after I found that notebook. A Tuesday morning, early, quiet, the same way he'd lived his whole life. I was right there holding his hand, and in one moment he just stopped breathing. No drama to it. Just a different kind of silence than any we'd shared in 39 years together. I didn't tell anybody about the notebook. Not even Renee. Not that week. What I did instead was call a lawyer. There was a woman who'd been coming into my diner since she opened her practice about 8 years back. Diane Coker, business disputes attorney. Always ordered the same thing, scrambled eggs with extra crispy bacon. Always tipped well. We'd never talked about anything beyond the menu before that week. I called her on Wednesday, the day after Harold passed, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. Told her I needed a private consultation, urgent, and I'd rather she come to my house than me showing up at her office, because I didn't want anybody in Savannah seeing me walk into a law office before Harold's funeral had even happened. Diane came by Thursday evening, sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and stayed quiet while I laid the notebook open in front of her, page by page, showing her every one of Harold's entries. She read through it slow, didn't interrupt once. When she got to that final line, God forgive me, I don't have the strength left to fight this. She looked up at me and said something I'm not going to forget. Barbara, your husband documented 2 years of fraud with more precision than most of my clients pay an accountant to put together. This isn't a suspicion. This is evidence. I asked her what I should do. She told me not to do anything. Not yet. Said any rash move, any direct confrontation with Dale before she'd had a chance to examine the company's official records, would give him a chance to cover his tracks, clean up the paper trail, get ready. Let him think you're just the grieving widow, she said. That's going to be your advantage. I agreed. But something in me had already shifted the afternoon I found that notebook tucked inside the Bible. That same week, while I was pulling together the funeral with Renee, picking out the casket, the flowers, what would be served after at the church hall, Diane was working quietly on the outside, pulling the company's bank records, checking the public filings on every job Harold had listed in that notebook, putting together a picture I didn't even know the full size of yet. The funeral was set for that Saturday, and it was there, between the flowers and the hugs and all those people crying over me, that the first men in suits started showing up. Saturday morning, the funeral home on Habersham Street filled up fast. 200 people, maybe more. Half the town, it felt like. Regulars from the diner, church folks, men Harold had worked construction with over 30 years, women I'd known since Renee was in grade school. All of them coming up to me the same way, one after another, saying the same soft things. "Barbara, I'm so sorry." "He was such a good man." "You two were together so long. What are you going to do now?" I hugged every single one of them. Let them hold my hands. Let them cry on my shoulder. Let them tell me how strong I was. I wasn't performing exactly. I was grieving, real grief, the kind that doesn't care what else is going on around it. But underneath that grief, there was a part of me standing very still and watching everything, because I noticed something most people at that funeral didn't. Dale Kessler showed up with 3 other men I didn't recognize. Nice suits, the kind you don't buy off a rack in Savannah. They stood near the back during the service, and I caught Dale looking my way more than once, not with grief on his face, but something closer to calculation. The same look, I realized later, that I'd probably had on my own face plenty of times that week. After the service, at the reception in the church hall, one of those unfamiliar men made his way over to me. Introduced himself as Grant Pelletier, said he was an old friend of Harold's from way back. Offered his condolences with a firm handshake that lasted a beat too long. I'd never heard Harold mention a Grant Pelletier in 39 years of marriage. Dale came by not long after, wrapped me up in a hug that smelled like too much cologne, told me how much Harold meant to him, how they'd built something special together, how I shouldn't worry about a thing on the business side. "I've got it all handled, Barbara. You just focus on grieving. We'll sort the details out when you're ready." I thanked him, told him that meant a lot, but I was watching his eyes the whole time he said it, and I was thinking about a spiral notebook sitting in my dresser drawer, and about a line Harold wrote in September that I couldn't get out of my head. I don't have the strength left to fight this. Diane Coker came to the reception too, dressed plain, blending into the crowd the way a good lawyer knows how to do. She caught my eye once across the room, gave me the smallest nod. And that was it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Later that evening, after most everybody had cleared out, and it was just family cleaning up leftover casseroles, Renee asked me if I was doing all right. I told her yes. Told her I just needed some rest. What I actually did that night, after she went to bed, was sit at my kitchen table with the notebook open in front of me again, and a legal pad Diane had left with me, writing out every question I wanted answered before those men in suits came back around. Because I already knew, the way you know weather's changing before the sky tells you, that they weren't done showing up at my door. They'd be back, probably sooner than they thought was decent. I just wanted to be ready when they did. The men came back Monday morning, 2 days after the funeral, right around 8:15. I'd been up since 5, same as always, hands moving through a batch of biscuits out of pure habit, even though the diner was still closed for the week. Dale was there again, along with Grant Pelletier, the one who'd introduced himself as an old friend of Harold's from way back, that I'd never once heard mentioned in 39 years. There was a third man, too, younger, carrying a leather folder he kept adjusting under his arm like it made him nervous. I let them in. Offered coffee, because that's what you do in Savannah. even when you already know exactly why somebody's standing on your porch. Dale did most of the talking, told me how hard this must be, how he wanted to make things easier on me during such a difficult time, how there was some paperwork tied to the business that really just needed to get squared away sooner rather than later. Nothing complicated, he said. Just routine transfer documents, so the company could keep running smoothly without any gap in operations. The younger man opened the folder and set several pages on my kitchen table, slid a pen across toward me before I'd even had a chance to look at the first page. "It's mostly just formality, Barbara," Dale said. "Harold's shares transferring over per the buy-sell agreement we set up years back. You sign here, here, and initial there, and you won't have to think about any of this again. I know numbers and contracts aren't really your world. That's what I'm here for." I looked down at those papers. I recognized the language almost immediately, because I'd read something close to it 3 separate times in Harold's own copies over the past 8 months, sitting beside his hospital bed while he was too tired to focus on more than a page at a time. "Buy-sell agreement," I repeated, keeping my voice soft, keeping my face exactly the way I imagine a woman looks when grief has worn down every bit of fight left in her. "Remind me what that covers again, Dale." He explained it slow, careful, the same tone you'd use with somebody you assumed couldn't follow much past the 3rd sentence. Told me it just meant his share of the business would grow to reflect his increased responsibilities, now that Harold wasn't there to split duties, and that my payout would come as a lump sum instead of ongoing distributions. "Cleaner that way," he said. "Easier for you not to have to deal with business matters going forward." I nodded along. Let a little quiver come into my voice when I asked if I could have a few days to look things over before signing anything, seeing as I was still processing everything. Dale's face did something small then. A flicker, there and gone. The kind of look a man gets when the easy path he expected isn't quite as easy as he counted on. But he covered it fast, patted my hand across the table, told me, of course, take all the time I needed. No rush at all. They left around 9. I watched their car pull out of the driveway from my kitchen window, and I picked up my phone and called Diane before it was even out of sight. "They just tried to get me to sign away Harold's share of the company," I told her. 2 days after the funeral. Diane. 2 days. She was quiet a second on the other end. Then she said, "Good. Now we know exactly how scared he is." Diane called me back 3 days later, on a Thursday, and asked if she could come by that evening instead of talking over the phone. That alone told me something. She wasn't the type to waste a drive across town on good news that could have waited for a call. She sat at my kitchen table with a folder thicker than the one Dale had tried to hand me, and she started laying it out piece by piece. The company's public filings didn't match what Harold had written in that notebook. Not even close. 4 job sites listed as active in company records that, according to county permits, had never actually broken ground. A consulting fee paid out to something called Coastal Advisory Group 4 times over 18 months. And when Diane traced the business registration on that LLC, guess whose name showed up as the registered agent? Dale's brother-in-law. "He's been running money through a shell company," Diane said. "Dressed up as consulting fees. But it's really just moving cash to himself through a second name. Your husband's notebook lines up with every single one of these transactions, almost to the dollar. I sat with that for a minute. 20 years of friendship, standing up at my nephew's wedding, Sunday dinners at my table more times than I could count, and the whole time bleeding money out of a business he built side by side with my husband. "What does this mean for me?" I asked her. Diane leaned back in her chair. "It means you're not just the grieving widow anymore, Barbara. You're the majority owner of a company that Dale Kessler has been systematically defrauding for 2 years. And you've got documented proof written in your own late husband's handwriting. That buy-sell agreement he tried to get you to sign Monday morning, it would have locked you out before you ever saw a dime of what you're actually owed." "So what do I do?" "You don't sign anything," she said. "And you let him come to you again, because he will. Men like Dale Kessler don't stop pushing once. They just wait a little and try again softer." She was right. The following week, Dale called the diner directly during the lunch rush, sounding warmer than he had at my kitchen table. Said he was just checking in. Said he understood I needed more time. Said there was no pressure at all. But maybe we could grab coffee soon. Just the two of us. Talk things through like old friends. I told him that sounded lovely. Told him I'd call him back once I had a better handle on things. What I didn't tell him was that Diane had already filed a formal request for a full independent audit of Kessler and Whitfield Construction, invoking my rights as 50% owner following Harold's death, a right, it turned out, that Harold himself had quietly written into their original partnership agreement back in 1991. The one document in that whole mess Dale apparently forgot still existed. Diane found it buried in the county business records. Said it was almost like Harold had left me a door nobody remembered was there. I thought about that phone call with Dale for a long time after I hung up. Thought about him standing at my husband's funeral with his arm around my shoulder, telling me how much Harold meant to him. I decided the coffee could wait. What couldn't wait was the audit. It took Diane 3 weeks to get the independent audit moving. Dale fought it every step of the way. First claiming the partnership agreement Harold signed back in '91 was outdated and superseded by later documents. Then claiming I didn't have standing since the buy-sell agreement was already in motion. Then, when both of those arguments fell apart in front of a judge, simply stalling, not returning calls, misplacing requested records, the kind of delay tactics Diane told me she'd seen 100 times before from men who know exactly what a forensic accountant is going to find and are just trying to buy time to clean house. The judge wasn't having it. Ordered the records turned over within 10 days, or Dale would be held in contempt. What came back, once the forensic accountant Diane hired got through it all, was worse than even Harold's notebook had suggested. The Coastal Advisory Group payments were just the beginning. Dale had been inflating material costs on nearly every job for the better part of 3 years, pocketing the difference through a network of invoices from companies that, once you trace them back far enough, all led to people connected to him. His brother-in-law, a cousin, even a woman Diane later confirmed was his mistress of 6 years. Something I hadn't known and didn't especially want to. All told, the accountant's report put the number at just over $340,000, siphoned out of Kessler and Whitfield Construction since 2021. I remember sitting at my kitchen table when Diane read me that number over the phone. And for a second, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that 8 months of watching my husband die and 2 more weeks of fighting his old friend hadn't let me feel until right then. Then I thought about Harold, sitting in a hospital bed too weak to hold a pen steady, writing dates and numbers into a spiral notebook because he didn't have the strength left to do anything else about it. And the tired turned into something with more edge to it. "What happens now?" I asked Diane. "Now," she said, "we take it to him directly, not through lawyers first. I want you in the room." I asked her if that was a good idea. A woman my age sitting across from a man who'd been stealing from her family for years, showing him she knew everything before any paperwork forced his hand. Diane said something I've held on to since. "Barbara, Dale Kessler has spent 30 years watching people underestimate you. Your husband did too, in his own quiet way, not out of unkindness, just because that's the world he grew up in. I think it's time somebody in that man's life finds out what happens when they're wrong about you." We set the meeting for the following Tuesday. Diane's office, neutral ground, 9 in the morning. I spent that weekend doing something I hadn't done in a long while, not grieving, not investigating, just sitting with myself. I went to the diner Saturday morning even though it was still closed, sat in my usual booth by the window, and looked out at the street Harold and I had built our whole life around. I thought about 39 years of a marriage where I never once had to raise my voice to be heard by the man who loved me. Tuesday, I decided, I wasn't going to raise my voice either. I was just going to make sure Dale Kessler heard every single word. Diane's office sat on the 2nd floor of a building on Bull Street. Nothing fancy. Just clean and professional in a way that made you sit up straighter the moment you walked in. Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock sharp, I wore my good navy dress. Not black. I was done wearing black. And I sat down at the head of the conference table before Dale even got there, which I don't think he expected. He walked in at 9:05 with his own lawyer trailing behind him, a heavyset man named Curtis Fenn, who I recognized from around town, but had never actually met. Dale's smile faltered a little when he saw me sitting there already, folder in front of me, Diane at my right hand, instead of across some kitchen table serving him sweet tea. "Barbara," he said, sitting down slow, "I wasn't expecting you to bring counsel. I wasn't expecting you to try to steal $340,000 from my husband's company," I said. "Guess we're both surprised today." Fenn started to object, something about unsubstantiated claims, but Diane slid a copy of the forensic audit across the table before he finished his sentence. Watched Dale's face while he read it. Watched the color leave it slow, page by page, the way ice melts off a windshield in the morning sun. Not all at once, but steady, until there's nothing left covering what was underneath the whole time. "The coastal advisory payments," Diane said, "trace directly to an LLC registered under your brother-in-law's name. The inflated material costs on the Ashford Lane project match almost dollar for dollar. Entries in a notebook my client's late husband kept documenting exactly this pattern of fraud over the last 2 years of his life." Dale looked up at me then. Really looked, for the first time since Harold's funeral. Harold kept a notebook. "He knew, Dale," I said. "He knew for almost 2 years, and he was too sick and too tired to fight you about it. So he wrote it all down instead. Every date, every dollar. He trusted you for 20 years, and you spent the last 2 of them robbing him while he was dying. Fenn tried to steer things towards settlement talk, tried to use words like misunderstanding and accounting discrepancies. But Diane wasn't having any of it. She laid out exactly what came next, if this didn't resolve today. Full civil suit. Referral to the district attorney's office for criminal fraud. The works. Told them the offer on the table was simple. Dale would sign over his full interest in Kessler and Whitfield construction. To me, no further compensation, in exchange for Diane not filing the criminal referral that afternoon. Dale sat there a long moment. I watched 20 years of easy charm drain right out of him, and underneath it was just a tired, frightened man who'd gotten comfortable believing nobody was ever going to look closely enough to catch him. "Barbara," he said quietly, "we were friends." "Harold was your friend," I said. "I was just the wife who made biscuits and didn't ask questions." Except I did ask questions, Dale. I just asked them quiet enough that you never noticed I was listening. He signed everything by 11 that morning. The company transferred into my name by noon that same Tuesday. Diane handled the paperwork, and I sat there and watched Dale Kessler sign away 20 years of business without saying another word to me. Curtis Fenn walked him out. Neither one of them looked back. I didn't feel triumphant the way you might expect. I felt something quieter than that, steadier. It took about 4 months to sort everything out properly. Hiring a new project manager to replace Dale's role, working with Diane to recover part of what he'd taken through a settlement instead of dragging it through years of court. Deciding what to do with a construction company I'd never asked to run. In the end, I kept it small. Sold off 2 of the larger contracts to another local builder, kept the crews Harold had trained himself over the years, and let it run quiet and honest the way Harold always meant it to. I still get up at 5 most mornings. Still make biscuits at the diner 3 days a week, even though I don't have to anymore. Renee tells me I could retire fully now, travel, slow down. I tell her slowing down was never really who I was, and Harold married me, knowing that. I put his notebook in a safe deposit box, not because I need to look at it again, but because some things you keep the way you keep a person's memory. Close, but put away where it won't hurt you every time you open a drawer. People still come up to me at church sometimes, still say how sorry they were about Harold, still tell me how strong I must be. I let them say it. I don't correct them, don't tell them the whole story. Some things a woman just keeps to herself. What I'll tell you, if you're listening to this and you're the type of woman people underestimate, the quiet one, the one who serves the coffee and keeps her head down and lets everybody else do the talking, don't ever let that fool you about what you're capable of when it matters. I watched my husband suffer for 2 years without the strength left to protect what he built. I had plenty of strength left. I just used it quiet, the way I'd learned to do everything in this life. That's the whole story. Harold's gone, and I miss him every single day, but I made sure nobody got to walk away with what belonged to him. That's the only ending I needed. Post-credits. One more thing, before I let you go. Remember Grant Pelletier, the man who came up to me at the funeral? Told me he was an old friend of Harold's, from way back. Shook my hand a little too long? Diane found out who he really was about a month into all this. Wasn't a friend of Harold's at all. Never met him a day in his life. He was Dale's personal attorney. Sent to that funeral on purpose, dressed the part, time to catch me right when the grief had me at my softest. Hoping I'd be the kind of widow who signs whatever's put in front of her out of sheer exhaustion, surrounded by flowers and casseroles and people telling her how strong she is. I think about that sometimes. A man standing at my husband's funeral, arm around my shoulder, calling himself Harold's friend, while the whole time he was just there to get a signature. I never did shake his hand again after that. But I did think it was worth mentioning. Some folks just don't quit trying, even at a funeral.